Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining my session today. My name is Rohan Matthews, and I'm a senior manager at AWS, responsible for the AWS Outpost service. And today I'm here to talk to you about reinventing hybrid and extending AWS to where customers need it. This is a really important topic to me. I really enjoy meeting with customers who say, they love AWS services, but they really wish they could have it closer to where their businesses dictate a need for those services, and they can't move those business needs up to an AWS region. So today I'm going to walk you through kind of the spectrum of what we launched in 2019 and how that's progressed and grown through 2020, and give you an idea of where we're going with the services that make up our hybrid portfolio. So let's start by talking about why hybrid is important. Let's start off with some stats. Cloud adoption continues to increase. According to Gartner, cloud share of total IT spend will grow from about 33% in 2020 to about 45% in 2024. That's pretty massive growth. Customers want to extend cloud to workloads that remain on-premise. As a result, interest in hybrid discussions has grown by about 15% in the last 3 years. So there's significant opportunity for us to extend the AWS cloud to help customers with their workloads that have to remain on-premise. So what are some of those workloads? They're workloads that require ultra-low latency for local systems, like real-time multiplayer games such as Riot's Valorant title that launched last year. They're workloads that require local data processing, such as healthcare PACS systems for imaging. And they're workloads that have data residency requirements due to protection of sensitive financial data or classified information with data sovereignty regulations. What customers have told us is that they want the same experience from their workloads that remain on-prem or at the edge as they do in the cloud. They want to run their workloads across on-premise, the edge, and the cloud in exactly the same way. So they want the same reliable, secure, and high-performance infrastructure. They want the same operational consistency. They want the same APIs and services that they use in the cloud, at the edge, and on-premise. And they want to be able to use the same tools that they've been using to deploy workloads in these environments. And something that's really key to our customers is the ability to benefit from the pace of innovation that AWS brings. So let's start by talking about the AWS Outpost service. Well, we have other hybrid solutions in our portfolio, such as VMware Cloud on AWS and the Snow family. We're going to focus mainly on the Outpost, local zones, and wavelength services today. So let's just kick it off with Outpost. All right, so we announced AWS Outpost in 2019 at reInvent, and this last year, 2020, has been a really big year for us for the AWS Outpost service. The Outpost service brings the same AWS-designed infrastructure as we run in our data centers to customers' premises. It's fully managed, it's monitored and operated by AWS, just like we manage and monitor the services we provide in region. And what's huge and what's a real game changer for us is, and for our customers, is the single pane of glass management of infrastructure running on-premise, connected to the cloud, and in the cloud. So we expanded to about 51 countries this year to provide this fully managed experience to our customers. All right, we also have been hard at work launching a number of new services on Outpost. So, for example, the Amazon RDS service was launched with new database engines. The S3 on Outpost service was launched to meet our customers' needs for object storage at the edge. And there's quite a few other features and capabilities that have been launched, and I encourage you to take a look at our website to get an idea of all the features that we have on the Outpost service now. The AWS Outpost catalog, it includes options supporting the latest generation of Intel-powered EC2 instances with and without local instance storage. For those customers who need some type of storage local, block storage, for example, we provide EBS GP2 volumes in our Outpost service. But customers can expect to use the same families of instances as we have in region, which are based on the Nitro hypervisor. So for example, the M5, the C5, and the R5 families, those are going to be the same in region as they are on the Outpost. All right. What else is same and new on Outpost? So Outpost provides the same management interfaces and tools as we do in region. So you can use things like CloudFormation, or CloudWatch, and CloudTrail, just like you would for monitoring and managing your workloads in region. You do the same thing on Outpost, and you get a nice consistent view across what's running in your Outpost and what's running in the region for those hybrid workloads. Just to explain kind of a little further about how we make this happen, you can see that what we're doing is seamlessly extending your VPC from on-prem or from the region to your Outpost. And what that essentially looks like is another availability zone. So the Outpost you would essentially think of it like another availability zone, much like you have multiple AZs in a region. And figuring out where to launch your workload is just a matter of picking a specific subnet, which in this case could be a subnet on your Outpost, and deploying your workload to that subnet. Workloads in that subnet on the Outpost can talk to subnets in the region. Your workloads don't need any sort of specific networking to be implemented in order for two different components or multiple components of your workload running locally or in the region to talk to one another. So this gives you, this is extremely powerful and makes it super easy for you to run hybrid workloads and run just the pieces of the workload exactly where you need it and where you get the best either economics or scale or services. I want to just double click a little further. So there is an aspect of the AWS Outpost service that requires interconnecting the Outpost racks to your local network. And it wouldn't be a hybrid service unless you could actually communicate between workloads on your Outpost and workloads on your local network. To enable that, what we've done is we've built capability into the Outpost. We have top-of-rack switches in the Outpost that enable the local connectivity. And then we configure virtual interfaces between the Outpost and your local network. We use standard protocols for availability and for link aggregation like LACP. So you still get the same benefits from a networking layer that you would in your on-prem environment or in the AWS environment. But then on top of that, we've layered a local gateway. The local gateway is similar to an internet gateway. It allows workloads in the Outpost or in AWS to talk to things outside AWS and vice versa. And the local gateway is how you seamlessly interconnect workloads that are running on-prem with workloads that are running on-prem in an Outpost. So this is kind of we'll call it the secret sauce of how Outpost really simplifies building hybrid workloads and hybrid environments. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what the Outpost form factor looks like. So we have to bring a 42U rack into your environment, and this environment needs to be roughly a data center grade environment. The racks are data center grade, so you provide the power for these racks and the network connectivity, and then AWS handles the delivery, the installation, the maintenance, and AWS remotely monitors your infrastructure. So if something goes wrong, there's a problem with the infrastructure, we'll get notified and we'll send somebody out to take care of it for you. Now, we've received a lot of positive feedback on and interest on Outpost, but we've also received a lot of feedback from our customers that a 42U rack is not something that they can put just about anywhere. And we have customers that want to put Outpost in a variety of locations that don't necessarily have a full-blown data center or data center floor inside that location. So we've been listening to our customers and kind of working through how we would put Outpost into locations like retail stores, branch offices, maybe even like healthcare clinics, and things like factory floors, for example. So I'm excited to actually tell you about what we have coming in 2021, which is our Outpost smaller form factor. We call them Outpost servers. They're a 1 and 2U form factor, and they don't require the same Outpost rack. They can be racked into standard 19-inch form factor racks, and they're still based on the Nitro system. So, like I mentioned before, you're going to get the same benefit from the same benefit and same instance types that we provide in Region, not just from a performance perspective, but also from a security perspective. And these will be available, like I said, coming soon later this year. Now, let me talk a little bit about what you get. So using the Outpost service in smaller form factor, you can run complete applications at the edge. And those applications may require low latency, local processing of some sort. But you can also deploy other higher level services beyond just compute and storage. So think about services like containers. In our case, EKS and ECS, that's our Elastic Kubernetes service, and our Elastic Container services will be available. You also get the full benefit of our networking suite through our Amazon VPC. And you'll also be able to run workloads like IoT. So think of things like services like AWS IoT Greengrass, for example. That'll be available for you to consume off of these smaller form factor Outposts. All right. So that in a nutshell was kind of the Outpost portion of the family. I mentioned we were going to talk about local zones and wavelengths also. So let's kind of zoom out, and we were talking about where we can drop off AWS infrastructure and give you, our customers, the full AWS experience, or the AWS experience at the edge. Now let's zoom back a little bit to another edge service. It's not necessarily going to run in your data center, but it may run in your geo or in your metro area. And we call this our AWS Local Zone service. So local zones are infrastructure that's deployed in such a way that it's, like I mentioned, it's going to be around either a population center, an industry center, an IT center. And it's an area where AWS does not have a region today. So local zones, much like Outpost, are fully managed by AWS. So customers can think of them as availability zones that are just closer to where they are and where they need to run their workloads. Local zones can be used for highly demanding use cases that require single-digit millisecond latency to end users. These use cases include media and entertainment, content creation that require that have latency sensitivity for things like live production, video editing, or like graphics-intensive artist workstations. But local zones can also support things like multiplayer games. So think of this as like a multiplayer game having a game server distributed as close as possible to the players to reduce the in-game latency, so all the players get a very similar experience between by running on this server that's located closer to their to where the servers are to where the users and the players are distributed. Okay, so local zones wouldn't be helpful unless they were actually available in a number of locations, and we're happy to actually introduce that we're launching 12 more local zones in 2021 into metro areas like Atlanta, Chicago, Dallas, Denver, Los Angeles, Las Vegas. We have one in Los Angeles already. Minneapolis, New York, Philadelphia, Phoenix, Portland, and Seattle. And one caveat I want to call out is not every service is available in every local zone. And so 2 local zones may have slightly different services available. And this is dependent on us kind of listening to customers and hearing what type of services they need in that particular geo or location, and then making those services available. So I mentioned services, so let's talk about that a little bit. We're going to provide EC2, again, just like with Outpost. It's going to be the same type of, same Nitro-based instances. But we're also going to make available, beyond EC2 and EBS, we're going to make available FSX for Windows, for example, and FSX for Lustre. So these are additional storage services that you don't get in an Outpost today, but you can get and consume in a local zone. We're also going to provide, much like Outpost, our load balancing, Elasticache, EKS, EMR services. And then from a security perspective, you can also benefit from using AWS Shield in a local zone. So apart from the services I just discussed, much like Outpost, you're going to be able to utilize the same regional tools that are available to you, just like I mentioned before with Outpost. Your CloudFormation, CloudWatch, CloudTrail, that's all going to be honed, if you will, to a parent region. And you can now manage your workloads between something running on-prem on an Outpost, some components running on a local zone, and other components running back in the region. And you can get full visibility across those, full management, full orchestration. So that's pretty powerful, and we've tried really hard to simplify those means of deployment. All right, so how do you get started? Local zones, like I mentioned, are different from Outpost. With Outpost, you order a certain amount of capacity, and that capacity is brought to your location. We install it, and once we get it online and connected back to the region, you go to your console and you're up and running. Local zones, on the other hand, you have to actually opt into a local zone. So local zones are accessible from an API endpoint and the console of the parent region. So you got to go pick a parent region, and then you can see which local zones are available for you to sign up for. To get started, you need to actually enable a local zone for your account before you can deploy resources. So you can do this from the new zone setting section of the EC2 console, which is shown here. All right. So now you've selected a local zone, and you've enabled your account for that local zone. How do you deploy resources? Well, it's going to be very much like deploying resources in a region against multiple availability zones. I'd mentioned earlier, you need to think of a local zone kind of like an availability zone. And it's going to be a similar experience to an Outpost, where you target your workload at a specific subnet. In this case, you actually create a subnet in your VPC on the specific local zone you want to run your workload into. And that workload can talk to other components of the workload in the same VPC, which could be sitting in region, for example, the parent region, for example. So very powerful stuff. It really does make building out a truly hybrid workflow and a truly hybrid workload very seamless. So, we didn't stop there. We kind of looked at how customers were consuming just different types of applications, and mobile has been a really big driver of where customers are trying to go. A lot of customers are trying to deploy their workloads in such a way that they can run anywhere, anytime on any device. And so what AWS has done is we've gone and partnered to bring our customers what we call a wavelength zone. And a wavelength zone is similar to a local zone, but it's connected to a 5G network, and it's deployed into an edge node at a cellular carrier, for example. So let's talk about that a little bit, just so we can kind of differentiate when you may want to look at a wavelength zone and when you may want to look at a local zone, for example. So 5G really opens the door for many industries to develop new innovative applications, like I was saying a minute ago. And what a wavelength does is we're placing the wavelength at the 5G edge to eliminate network hops. Traditionally, an application running on a mobile device may have to go from the mobile device to the carrier network, from the carrier network across the internet to a specific AWS region, where it then consumes a service, and then it has to make that whole round trip all over again. But for latency-sensitive components of an application, that's just not going to work. It introduces too much latency, maybe too much jitter for the workload to function optimally. And so what we've done is provide services at the edge, at the 5G edge, just like we have in region, in order for you, the customer, to decide, which components can run in the region at higher latency and which components need to run at the edge. Okay, so where can you get local zone or wavelength zone services? Well, we've signed up with a few partners, and that list is ever growing. Some of our 5G partners today include Verizon, KDDI, SK Telecom, and Vodafone. And so, if you had a device on these carrier networks, you'd be able to consume services from a local zone directly through the 5G network versus the round trip I had explained a minute ago. Okay. Now, what I want to talk about just a little further is just overall how it works. So let's dig a little deeper into how wavelength works. So a wavelength is, like I mentioned, a piece of AWS infrastructure that's installed at a physical site that's part of the communication service provider's network. So we call that the CSP. A CSP network has physical locations and equipment like cell phone towers. They could be a CSP location, and those locations and that equipment connect with traffic aggregation points at kind of the metro level. Wavelength zones are installed at these metro aggregation sites. So the 5G access network is directly connected to the wavelength zone, and through a construct that we call a carrier gateway. Now, this may sound familiar. I mentioned with Outpost, we have a construct called the local gateway that allows us to communicate between a customer's premise and workloads on the customer's premise and workloads running in the Outpost on the customer's premise. Similarly, workloads can communicate through a carrier network via a carrier gateway, which is part of our wavelength zone service. All right. So this diagram just illustrates kind of that whole flow I've been explaining, and demonstrates where in the flow of an application from a mobile device through the CSP network all the way through the internet and back to the region, the most savings can be had from a latency perspective. So latency is typically on the order of tens of milliseconds if you look across the board mobile population at the edge, versus trying to run all the way back to a region where it's possible that latencies can be much higher, on the order of 5 or 6 times higher for your application to run directly from a region. And that's through the carrier network. So what I'm showing here in this example is how an instance, in this case instance Y on the diagram, is running in a wavelength zone, and how it can connect to instance B and D and Z over the local VPC network. And this is no different than how your workloads communicate between different availability zones in a region. Concepts like transit gateway and VPC peering continue to work, and you can use endpoint services like S3 just like you would if you were running in an AWS region, just at a little higher latency because you're running at the carrier's edge. With Wavelength, we've introduced the carrier gateway, like I'd mentioned, to route the traffic between the wavelength zone and the carrier network at a specific location, as well as any outbound traffic to the internet. So this is what's kind of in the diagram at the top, coming out of the wavelength zone and heading out to the internet. The carrier gateway provides the connectivity between your wavelength zone and telecommunication provider's network. And so I wanted to kind of provide a different representation of what that looks like when considering how workloads run in the wavelength zone and actually across AWS regions as well. Okay, so when you're building an application, there are certain things you need to think about differently. You need to think a little differently when building an application using a wavelength zone versus like a local zone or an outpost. And that is the synchronous and asynchronous nature of your workload. So for synchronous type of interactions, you're going to want to run that as close to the end device as possible. For asynchronous operations, you can afford the extra latency and you can run those further away from the actual end user device. For latency-sensitive applications, we're thinking about things like real-time operations, real-time computations, for example, or things like that are very distributed in nature. You could have many different devices coming in and needing to communicate with one another, but you don't want to necessarily send all that information back to a region and then have it sent all the way back to those devices. From a asynchronous perspective, you may be able to do things like authorization, or you may be able to run database workloads, and those can run probably just fine at higher latencies in an AWS region, and those can also benefit from the scale and economics of using an AWS region versus a wavelength zone. And so those are things you need to keep in mind when you're thinking about where I should run my workload. What part should I run in a wavelength zone? What part should I run in an AWS region? And then you could even extend that further to include a local zone or an outpost, for example. So this is the family picture. This is kind of where we're headed, and what our hybrid portfolio looks like today. We have outpost racks that are the data center grade, data center form factor outpost. We have outpost servers, the 1U and 2U variants that are coming out later this year. We're deploying more local zones. We had Los Angeles. Now we're going into 12 more cities and bringing local zones to those cities. And then with wavelength zones, we're expanding our partnerships with carriers to provide more wavelength zones in more locations around the world. So with that, I'd like to thank you for letting me walk you through what we have. You can see we're super excited about this topic about hybrid. It's front of mind for a lot of our customers, and we're really excited to help them with being able to deploy their workloads everywhere and have this consistency and see the benefits of cloud everywhere. And if you want to learn more about Outpost or about AWS and all the capabilities that we have, I encourage you to visit our AWS training and certification site, where you can go a little bit deeper with our digital training, classroom training. You can jump into certifications and try out some of our other enterprise resources. And again, thank you for the time today. Really appreciate it. And don't forget, hit our website and check out the services that we have and we have coming from kind of the hybrid portfolio side of the house. Just one more reminder. You thought you were going to get rid of me. So last reminder, please complete the session survey. Your feedback is much appreciated and definitely helps us develop new capabilities and improve these sessions for you. So thanks again. Have a good day.